All right, guys, we got the intro to the intro again, like we do. Uh, so I want to talk to you about our sponsor, our continued sponsor, not just our sponsor, our continued sponsor. It's none other than Bad Motivator Barrels. You can see them right above my head. That's the Garyana oak. Anyway, beyond that, let's get into it. So why am I redoing the intro to the intro? Well, Christopher and I from Bad Mo Legacy had talked, and yeah, we were doing the Shaman 5. We were like, hey, this is cool. Let's do the Shaman 5. But we realized that it's been going well, and thank you to all who all picked up a barrel, used the code. We both appreciate it. It gives us a good kind of diagram of who's wanting a barrel and who's not. And thank you for everybody who came and chimed in on the giveaway. It was amazing. We had a good turnout for that as well. And no, I haven't lost my hair yet. Haven't started treatment, so haven't lost no hair. Soon, it's coming. One of the things we decided is we're going to do a affiliate link. And so what the affiliate link does is it basically, you click on the link, it tells Ben, rest in peace, brother. It tells Chris, it tells him that somebody from the podcast is going to the website, and it knows to ding that. And so, like, I get a little bit off of it, but yet he doesn't lose any money on it. Does that make sense? So it's just like the affiliate links from Amazon and stuff like that. Only this is supporting a local company, not local to me, but local, American company. As you well know, Bad Mo makes amazing barrels, small barrels for craft guys, for home distillers, for whoever. I use them. I like to take new make from a local distillery, Andalusia mostly. Anyway, and I take them, put them in there. Like that one is some rum. Yeah. I'm not just whiskey. I like a little rum too. It's a special project. We'll talk about that later. Anyway, so you get some White Dog, some new make, throw it in there, let it sit for a while, and you have some whiskey, you have some rum, you have some brandy, whatever you want to do. You throw it in there, you're going to get a cool outcome. So think about a Bad Motivator. Go to badmotivatorbarrels.com. That's going to be the link. It'll have an affiliate thing at the end of it. You'll click the affiliate link. I'm going to have it on every podcast. I'm going to try and have it on every post I do if I can manage that. And then you just click on that. It'll take you to the website. You buy a barrel. I get a ding. Christopher gets a ding. Winner, chicken dinner. So, again, thank you guys all for the support, and enjoy the podcast, because it's a banger. It is. All right, guys, welcome back to the show. Today we got a special guest. I say that all the time. I'm getting special guests, but we have Michael from Yellow Rose Distilling, and he's going to talk to us about his personal things that he's doing, why he became a distiller and stuff. But we're also going to talk about Yellow Rose and some of their products. I personally am sipping on their rye whiskey. I just picked that up today. And we're going to kind of go through their products and talk about that. But without further ado, here's Michael. How's it going, man?
Thanks for having me.
No problem.
Yeah, so just want to shout out real quick. You can find us over at yellowrosedistilling.com. You can find me on Instagram at @distillerlangen. But thank you for having me today. Really excited to sit down and chat, enjoy a little whiskey, share my story, share the story of Yellow Rose, and hopefully just have a good chat, have a good time.
Absolutely. That's what we're all about. So give us a little background kind of on your personal thing, because, I've talked to quite a few people, and I'm not trying to incriminate anybody, but a lot of the people that I talk to, they start out with the whole distilling community in their shed, in their garage, doing things like that. Is that a similar profile to what you're doing? I'm interested to know that. Or did you come from a corporate background and just think, hey, this is cool, let's try this? So that's what I'm really interested about. So go ahead and give us a little bit of your background story, and we can go from
Sure,
there.
sure. No, I actually got into this whole distilling thing back, gosh, like over 10, 12 years ago. And I got it too on the legitimate end. My first job at a distillery was at a proper little craft
Oh,
distillery, and
okay.
proper little craft distillery might be being a little generous for what it was at the time, because it was actually in a garage sandwiched between a tire change place and a guy, a Mexican guy who did really cheap auto body work and repair. And we had the unit in the middle of those two. So to say I learned how to distill in a garage is probably fairly accurate, but I had the good fortune to learn on a 125-gallon Alembic Iberian style copper pot still
Oh, wow.
with a direct flame. And
Oh,
that yeah, so it was a fun setup. Really cool thing to learn on, but that's kind of where I got my start out there in California, actually. But I came from the craft beer world before that. So I'd been in craft beer, had been kind of the head brewer, solo brewer at a brew pub for about 5 years, had gone to a medium packing brewery, had had the misfortune to be involved in an industrial accident there and got pretty badly hurt. Came out of that and sort of like I was out for almost a year recovering.
oh, wow.
Had a head injury and came back and totally new leadership inside the distillery. I didn't really know anybody anymore. My sort of track and position had evaporated, and never really got any traction again with them, and just kind of got a little bit frustrated, and happened upon a guy who really needed somebody to make mash. And I was a beer guy, so I knew all about mash.
Right.
And so I came in and interviewed with him, and that was the beginning of my distillation career. I was there at the distillery in Sonoma County for about 7, 8 years. I mean, it was a little 780 square foot spot when I started, with one little still and a 600-gallon mash tun that was basically just a big metal pot that he had attached a bunch of augers, agitators to. You hand loaded the grain. It was a lovely, chaotic little thing. When I was young, I just loved being in the trenches working on it, but
Right.
really got in on the practical side, on the mash side, and was kind of told, like, listen, I'm always going to do the distilling, 'cause that's where I want to have my point of impact. I was like, I'm good, man. I'll just make the mash, because it looks like you could use some help there. So did that, and at some point he's like, okay, I'm going to teach you how to run the still, because I need you to do all the stripping runs, these first runs through this really time consuming, especially on a pot still, especially
Yeah.
on a direct fire still. It's like there's a lot going on. You got to be with it the whole time. And but got started like that, and that little place grew and grew. When I left, we had just kind of finished putting together a $5 million distillery, and then I had the opportunity basically to come out here to Yellow Rose in Texas. Got recruited to come out here and basically lead the operation. I've been here
Wow.
for about 4 or 5 years ever since.
Awesome. Awesome. So you coming from a beer background, and we've talked to a couple of people who have had a kind of beer background like that. So you really nerd out on the yeast and the fermentation time and the fermentation temperature, even
Oh
with your
yeah.
whiskeys, correct?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Like so much of what you're going to find in the distillate starts with your ingredients, starts with your fermentation. There's only so many things you get to control in this, right? Because
Yeah.
we're going to stick this thing in a barrel for 4 or 5 years, and the barrel's going to do a lot of magic to the liquid, right?
Yeah.
But if you don't start with a firm, solid base there at the grain level, if you don't put sound grain into the mash, if you don't have the right mash chemistry, if you don't have a productive and clean fermentation, and you don't have an efficient and suitable yeast, well, you're not going to have. And trust me, because as many times as I've gotten it wrong, there's those experiments we've tried to run where we didn't quite get it as good as we would have liked.
Right.
And I'm like, that distillate, man, it's heartbreaking to run almost, because you're like, man, it fights you the whole way.
Yeah.
And it's like the product thing, you're like, I'm just, this is, man, it's a huge waste. Real
Yeah.
tough to live with sometimes. But yeah, it's that grain and terroir and all that stuff that you get from using local grain. Both the distilleries that I've had the opportunity to work with have really had this ethos of using locally sourced in-state grain. So Sonoma Distilling Company, or Sonoma Distilling Company now, that I worked with before, was a grain to glass, all California grain distillery
Oh,
focused
wow.
on rye and a little bit of bourbon. And then, Yellow Rose, with the two bourbons that we make in-house, they're 100% Texas grain as well, and Texas malted grain. So, we're really fortunate in that respect, or I feel kind of blessed that to work for two distilleries that really kind of get us like, well, got to make the liquid about the place,
Right.
you know. So having that opportunity to work with and do those things rather than having a really commercially driven ethos around the liquid, sometimes it's a real nice benefit.
Right. Right. So with that kind of, and we love to get really nerdy and go into the deep end on all of this. Like with the place you were with in California, were you making beer as well as spirits, or just spirits?
Just spirits. It was
Okay.
actually a pure whiskey distillery. So
Oh,
both
cool.
distilleries that I've worked with in my career basically have both been pure whiskey distilleries, which is, to be honest, even in the craft world, is pretty rare.
It is.
Especially when I was starting out like 12 years ago. It's like basically every distillery had to do everything, right? Because that was usually the model for success. Is like, yeah, you know, for most people, a target or the ultimate evolution was going to be a brown product, right?
Right.
Probably whiskey or maybe brandy. Um, but you know what you did to pay the bills until that stuff was ready was usually gin and vodka, or
Yes.
liqueurs, or whatever else that you could kind of string together, right? Um, and you know, it was really, I thought it was really neat to work for two operations. And I was like, no, it's whiskey. You know, that's the thing we're going to focus on. We're going to be experts on this. We're going to own these two things, and just go with that. You know, Sonoma and Yellow
That's
Rose, a little bit different animals, but very, very similar in that respect.
so with, and I mean, I don't want you to give away any trade secrets or anything like that, but with both of those, I know Yellow Rose has been around for what, over 10 years now, is that correct?
Yeah, so both distilleries, ironically, founded in 2010, both
Okay.
part of that sort of what you could call like the Great Recession boom to craft
Yes,
distillation.
absolutely.
So, you know, I joined back in 2012, I want to say, at Sonoma. So it was only a few years old when I joined. And
Okay.
again, it was incredibly small at the time. Like, you
Right.
know, the garage attached to my house right now was bigger than the space we were working in. So it's
That's
just
funny.
like, you know, it kind of boggles my mind to think back on it and look where they're at now and see where
Yeah,
I'm doing out here in Texas. Like, man, you know, like it was very humble beginnings back then. I mean, it was
absolutely.
like, you know, we were filling up 5 gallon buckets, and every time that sucker got over half full, it's like, okay, let's swap that out. That's precious. We got to get that in the tank.
Absolutely.
You know, no pumps, no nothing. You got up the ladder, you put it down the funnel and into the tank by hand. And oh, I mean, it was archaic, but I loved it. And I mean, it was a
Absolutely.
great way to learn, I think. And, you know, the market was appreciative of that time and just anything that was coming out.
Yeah. And so like with Sonoma, that's the name of the one out of California, correct? Okay. With them, did they source any sort of whiskey before they
No, so it
so
was, and they started out like literally they made kind of everything to start. So they at one
right.
point even made like a poutine. They made a
Okay.
little bit of brandy. At one point
Okay.
they made rum. Like, you know, when I came into the business, basically the guy who ultimately kind of took it where it is today, got a gentleman named Adam. He was just in the process of buying out his former business partner, who was sort of the distillation expert.
Okay.
And maybe the tradition of people that you alluded to earlier that have, how should we say this, a little bit more roguish roots. He was definitely from that tradition, right?
Okay.
So, and you know, Adam was the sales and market guy, and then he kind of became the distillation guy and bought his partner out, and I became like the operations mash. Like I knew how to run stuff. I had worked in production atmospheres, and I knew what you had to do to make it work right, and how to chart it, how to log it, how to, you know, how to make it repeatable. So that kind of became my role. But yeah, I mean, they didn't source anything. And I remember many times there was that debate, like, do we wait for our stuff to get really, really good and we just kind of push through this and it's just part of the evolution?
Right.
Or should we go out there and like buy some stuff and just put everything in 53s? Because we went through the whole evolution of like 2 gallon to 5 gallon to 15 gallon to 30 gallon to
Yeah.
53 gallon.
Yeah.
So like it was, I mean, and you know, it was interesting. I came here to Yellow Rose, and they were in that same journey, where it's like, oh, we're moving out of small barrels. You know, Yellow Rose today only barrels in 53 gallon barrels. That was
Right.
one of like my first critical achievements for the brand under my tenure. Is like, no, we have to move away from all this stuff.
Yeah.
Economically, it's like, you know, it's just really not feasible, especially nowadays. Barrels have gotten so expensive with the scarcity of them,
Yeah.
and they're just hard to get. Period. Um, that is like, yeah, it can get real difficult to get that whiskey in the barrel and out to the bottle in a small format, I think. And, you know, for me, 30s is kind of the smallest size format I've ever really enjoyed working with. You can get some really good quality whiskey out of 15s, but they're tricky. 30s, to my opinion, like they very much sort of replicate 53 like flavor. that full format flavor, little shorter timeline, but a little bit more tannin profile.
Right.
So it's just a balancing act.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
all those operations, some of it didn't source. Yeah, I mean, Yellow Rose is kind of on the other side of that coin. We certainly do source. You know, so, premium American is like, it's a blend. So we
Right.
source whiskeys from all over to put it into a blended product to have. And in many ways, that blend is our volume driver in the place of something like a vodka or a gin.
Right.
And
Right.
the rye that you have there,
Mhm.
I'm not ashamed to say it was made by some of the finest distilleries in Indiana, who
Okay.
make incredible rye. And, we buy that rye basically brand new from them, bring it here to Texas, age it out, and then make our selections about what we put in the bottle.
Okay.
So, did we distill it? No. I mean, I won't claim that we did.
Right.
But, we do take a lot of pride in it. It is a product that we like. But I think honestly for us, the things that we're most proud of are our two bourbons. So the Outlaw
Yes.
and then Harris County, the newest edition.
Right. Right. And that's a good caveat into this whole Yellow Rose. Like I said, I'm sipping on the rye, and I noticed just, I'm one of those guys. I look at the label, I look at all the everything, and it says aged for at least 1 year. So that was aged completely in Texas, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So it does have a lighter color and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
being
And that one's
go ahead.
interesting because like it says 1 year, and as you know, it's like you go by the age of the youngest drop in the bottle, right?
Right.
So it's actually a blend of minimum 3 year and minimum 1 year. And in some instances, it's been like 2 and 4. So there have been instances where like the liquid in the bottle is technically a straight rye.
Okay.
But to go through the process of like changing the label and knowing that maybe we're not going to maintain that consistency batch to every batch, like
yeah,
it's if you were to look at the back of like Harris County or Outlaw, I think Outlaw still says 1 year as well.
Yes.
The Outlaw that my guys are harvesting right now for their newest batch is going to be 4 years old. And it's just a case where it's like, hey, we're just kind of catching up on the label and the packaging side with that, where it's like, okay, we're finally getting there. Harris County, I believe, says 30 months on the back. Cause I'm like, at the time when we started doing the harvesting, I was like, I'm not prepared to take any liquid below 30 months based on what I've tasted.
Right.
The reality is just like Outlaw, it's basically at 4 years now too. So these are like straight and straight.
Right.
These don't even require age statements technically
Right.
anymore for the liquid we're starting to harvest, and that'll be the case moving into the future. But that rye is an interesting beast. In fact,
It is. It is.
The thing I kind of like about it is because it's a lot lighter because of that young rye, the spice note is not like, coming from Sonoma, like we were a rye house. We did a 100% California rye. And I'm like, you could definitely, I remember many times tasting through barrels. It's like, whoa, that's a spice bump. We're just kind of like, okay, there's like a limit to how many of these you can put in a batch before it becomes unpalatable to the common man.
Yeah.
But I would say like the Yellow Rose rye is kind of the other side of that coin. It's a much more muted spice. It's more focused on sort of the leather, nut, like figginess, grassiness sometimes that you get out of the rye, and less on sort of that either that hot spice or that white pepper.
Right. Right. And one thing that I noticed on the smell as well, it's like it gets a good and I get this a lot in ryes, and I don't know if this is a 95.5 or if it is. Okay. So normally with 95.5s, you get a lot more and of course this being younger, it might not have developed that yet, but like a eucalyptus or something like that. But I'm getting a lot more like green apple or a tartness to it, which is really nice. And so this would be great in an old fashioned or something like that. I mean, it's pretty good, neat as well, but I feel like it would really shine in an old fashioned where you have that presence of that there, along with a little sweetness and stuff like that. I think it would shine. We'll see what happens with that later on.
That's for Instagram, right? Yeah, no, I think with the rye, kind of because there's so many 95.5 Indiana sourced ryes, right? And I'm like, you can only really recast that coin so many times. I mean, Dickel even has a Indiana sourced rye, and what do? They run it through a Lincoln County process to put ownership on it, right? So what did we do? A, we're going to bring the barrels to Texas. They're going to live here. And two, well, let's try to make something, the Texas palate doesn't really love, in whiskey, that super spiciness. What's the most popular whiskey in Texas? It's Crown Royale. Texas, and it's Crown and Coke is the #1 drink, right? So it's like, okay, Texans like sweet whiskey. So it's like, okay, well, we got to bend that way. It's like, let's dial back the spice, let's make it more approachable. I think that's kind of kind of the if you look at our bourbons, they're kind of a similar story. It's like, okay, like, even the high rye, it's like, well, it's high rye, but like, let's make sure there's a lot of sweetness in this. We got a lot of good bourbon character. We're really lucky in Houston with the climate that um, the way that the distillate interacts with the barrel, we get a ton of wood sugar extraction. So we get a lot of sweetness in both of our bourbons from that.
And I know personally, I've had the Outlaw. I got to try the Harris. I haven't been able to pick up a bottle because in my area, for some reason in my area, it's not there. I see it like at a like a whiskey bar, and I'll get a pour of it there, but like to get a bottle of it makes it a little bit difficult. But I've had the Outlaw, and when I first tried it, I said, man, that has a high rye content, and then I look at the back of it and I'm like, that's 100% corn. What the heck?
That's the craziest thing. And I think what most people, it's just like there's a really strong, almost like cinnamon candy pop there at the end of Outlaw, and people are like, man, the rye content is got to be pretty high on this one. I was like, no, sorry, but that's like 100% Texas Yellow Dent corn from the Panhandle. And like, no way. I'm like, no, that spice is actually from the distillation, so that's actually we're targeting that flavor profile in the distillation cuts themselves.
Okay.
So like it's a particular segment of the run that we're always looking to incorporate to give us that sort of cinnamon pop at the end. And I mean, you could taste it in the distillate stream when it's coming through.
Oh, really?
And basically right after that fades out is the end of the run. So that's kind of our marker almost on Outlaw.
So it's low in the hearts. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, well, relatively speaking, low in the hearts is a subjective term. Low in the hearts compared to who? If we're going to compare ourselves to Macallan, everybody's low in the hearts.
Absolutely.
Macallan cuts super high.
High.
Low in the hearts compared to a lot of legacy or mainstream American whiskeys. I'd say we're probably pretty similar.
Okay.
Again, I think it comes down to the terroir of that corn coming in out of the Texas Panhandle. And we are using kind of a more agronomic variety in Yellow Dent, right? It's like the most prolific corn breed in the country, right? But it grows well. It gives a lot of sugars, and I think it still gives a great flavor profile too. I mean, for a 1 grain bourbon, which is in and of itself a very odd thing.
Yes.
I mean, like there's a lot of flavor in that bourbon, and it is like, yeah, listen, there's probably 2 or 3 key elements from the distillate, and there's hi bud. Thanks, bud.
It's all good. It's all good.
I just want to make sure he didn't grab the whiskey out of my glass.
Yeah, exactly.
I was sort of like,
yeah, you gotta watch kids, man. You gotta watch
what's
kids.
going on, but I was like, hey, just don't. I mean, we're good, but
yeah, we're good.
I think what he noticed was my cat was crying at the door because he just he has to be up in everything, and my son probably, hey, why is the cat crying at that door? He did, but yeah, no, it's we get 1 or 2 good things out of that the grain in that distillate stream, and then a lot Outlaw. We have so many different barrel iterations of Outlaw in terms of finishes. We've looked at cognacs, 3 different types of sherries, rum, with an H, without an H, Martinique and Jamaican, so super high ester rums, and then like rum agricole style rums.
Yep.
So it's we played with that a lot. We've done a little bit of port. So it's been a lot of fun to play with Outlaw in that respect, because I'm like, it's one of the reasons I kind of enjoy it as a liquid. I was like, man, this stuff's pretty good on its own, and it stands up super well in cocktails. You can really layer with it. And by that same notion, it holds up super well to finishing, because that's sometimes the thing that, my personal opinion is, sometimes you get a finished barrel and like, oh, I can taste that finish, but I don't know if I really taste that whiskey anymore.
Exactly.
A lot of finish and not much whiskey.
Yeah, it's like doing an Amberana finish or something. You're like, it's all I taste is the Amberana. It's like I don't taste anything else.
Amberana is a special monster. I think especially here in Texas. I mean, I think here the heat in Texas, even especially down in Houston, is so intense. We do some of our barrel rest. It's like 3 months and done. It's just like get them in, get them out.
Yeah.
And I mean, and we've done some long-term ones. I think we did a couple like 2-year cognac finishes, and those were incredible. But again, it's sort of like, those are all like, we would just play with them basically because, I get a call from a barrel broker. They're like, hey, do you have any used barrels you want to sell? I was like, well, selling, that's interesting, but what about trading? What do you guys got on what do you guys got coming in that I might like that, I might have a harder time convincing my corporate partners is a good investment?
Yeah.
but they're perfectly fine to have me just cycle the money through the business.
Right.
Like, so, like we played with, I mean, I'd love to get an amber on a barrel, to be fair, because they last forever because you use them
Yes.
for like a week at a time.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I'm also just like, as busy as we are these days, I'd be so scared about like, oh shit, I forgot
I forgot
about a
about
barrel
it.
for 3 days.
Yeah.
It's absolutely destroyed the
Yeah,
liquid.
absolutely. All that time and money and energy, and it's
Oh
ruined.
gosh,
Yeah,
they're I mean, they're super pricey barrels. Like I would say
absolutely.
they're definitely on par with some of the best sherry barrels out there right now, or some of the best Japanese oak barrels. I mean, which are probably the only thing more expensive than the Amberana barrels and
Right.
even harder to get.
Yes.
But yeah, those. I mean, I'd love to play with some. I've heard great things. At the same time, it's just like, man, it's like it's not like playing like there's playing with fire when you have a box of matches, and there's
Right.
playing with fire when you have a blowtorch.
Yes.
Amarana
Yes.
barrels are a blowtorch. It's like,
Yes, they
okay,
are.
well, let's just be careful with this.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to get out of hand real fast. I could have swore you guys, I don't know if it was this year, and if you were there this year, I obviously wasn't, but if you were at the Bastards Ball for the Whiskey Tribe.
Yeah, we missed it this year. I think it was
Okay.
just a conflict where it's like I couldn't
Absolutely.
like there was one of those things. It's like we all got pulled off in the wrong direction,
Right.
basically at the wrong time, and
Right.
it was one. I know we were there the year prior. It was
Okay.
just one of those things.
I knew I'd seen y'all there, or if it was at the Texas Whiskey Festival or whatever. But
Yeah,
like,
no, we've
you
done a
know,
ton of those, but it was like this year it just didn't work out on the timing.
absolutely. But the Crowded Barrel, which is their little whiskey place, they did an Amberana finish. They bought a brand new Amberana barrel. Don't ask how much that cost. I can't even tell you. And they they sourced, they do a lot of sourcing, but they do a bunch of finishing stuff. They finished it was a Barton 1792 Bardstown, whatever, barrel. They rested it in there for 3 days, and it was almost overdone. And they had to pull it. And then the next time they did it was for 5 days. And so it's like, and he goes, every time we do it, we can put it in there for maybe 7 days. They've done like 4 iterations by now. I think they're up to 11 days. And then after that, they got to pull it. It gets too.
They're just sort of like, you got to be real careful. That first one, you're like, okay, so we're going to put it in on a Friday in the afternoon.
Right.
And Monday morning, first thing, this thing's coming out.
We're dumping it. We're dumping it. Exactly.
We're never going to taste it. It's coming out.
because I've heard this from other distillers and stuff like that. If you leave it in too long, it almost gets acrid, overdone. Alan Bishop from Spirits of French Lick said it's like cat pee. I don't know. I've smelled cat pee.
What's that coffee that they harvest? Basically, the beans that some jungle cat eats, and
yes,
I'm like,
yeah.
Listen, to the right buyer, I'm sure it's the most wonderful thing in the world.
It's great. I'm sure it's great. But Amberana in itself has its place, and everybody's finishing. I actually was at the liquor store today. That's why I picked up this bottle, and they had a Nulu, I guess Kentucky, whatever, blah blah. And they had an Amberana finish. I almost picked it up because I was like, that's something different. But I've got a couple Amberana finished whiskeys, and I'm like, they're good. They're not great. They're Cinnamon Toast Crunch.
It's like the Japanese oak thing, the Mizunara oaks. Like it was super popular like a year ago, and like everybody and their mother did a version of that. But the guys who did that first were Brisbane, a tiny little craft distillery off Washington Island in Washington, and they were the first ones to even pioneer getting a barrel. And I don't even think they even got the barrel; they got the wood.
Yeah,
and they brought it to a local cooper and had a barrel made in the States.
Yes,
but they said even that they said it was a 2-year process just to get that oak out of Japan. Yeah. Like the Japanese were just like incredibly protective of it,
which for good reason. Yeah. But then you also hear about the Mizunara oak, and why we're talking about oak, it doesn't matter. But with the Mizunara oak, that it can be really persnickety in the way that it wants to present, because you get Japanese whiskey, which of course that's a totally different climate than we have here. It will take years and years, like tens of years, to actually get any sort of profile on it. Whereas obviously, if you brought it here to Texas, you're going to get a lot hotter profile out of it.
I'd honestly be so scared of bringing it to Houston, because those barrels are notoriously bad leakers.
Yep.
Because that oak is so porous, it actually is it's not suitable for barrel construction in the traditional sense.
No.
So it's like you inherit a barrel is going to leak like crazy. Like we have like an angel share rate over the life of a barrel of like 18 to 23%
Oh
at full
gosh.
maturity. So I imagine just even putting it in there to finish and it taking any amount of time, and it's a leaky barrel and we have a super hot, unclimate controlled warehouse with a ton of humidity. I was like, God, there's not gonna be barrel's gonna be goddamn half empty.
Yeah,
By
absolutely.
the
By the
time
time
we
you
get
get
to
done
it,
with it, you're gonna have a
I was like,
puddle of
it's gonna
whiskey
be
on the
the most
ground.
expensive whiskey I ever make. You know, I'm gonna
Yeah.
have to put a pan under that thing so I can
Yeah.
fill it back up every day.
Yeah, you siphon it back in there every day.
Oh,
Like,
it's, you know,
yeah, it's
I'd
horrible.
almost be scared of working with it because I'm like,
Yeah.
man, we have enough trouble with our own barrels. You know, it's like, you know, we have like 8,000 barrels, and we recently did an audit. It was like, we discovered that during the course of the audit, like, yeah, we have some empty barrels in here. Like they're
Oh
just dead.
crap.
It just, what just happens,
Yeah,
right? And I'm like,
absolutely.
you know,
Yeah.
listen, I think, you know, on the surface, I'm like, oh my God, it's so much. I'm like, yeah, I mean, sure. In the literal sense, like, yeah, it's a lot of whiskey. In the business sense, I'm like, just add it to the percentages.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate to, I mean, it's one
Put
of
it
those things like, well, that's just part of making whiskey in
business.
Texas, basically.
Absolutely.
I'm like, that's just part of the business. Like, I guess I got another used barrel to sell. Fresh dumped, guys, right by
Yeah.
the Angels. You know, never been opened.
Yeah.
Enjoy. But yeah, it's just, it's one of those things that happens. You know, it's just, you know, there are some barrels that are, for whatever reason, the way the whiskey works on them, just, or the grain of that wood, or how well it was coopered. There's so many little things that affect barrels. Um, that it's like, you know, listen, leaking is inevitable. You know,
Yes.
it's, I don't know that I've ever come across a barrel of any age that doesn't have some sort of leak marks on it. I'm like, because at some point you have to quality check these.
Yeah.
Like you got to
Absolutely.
put a hole in it. At some point, it's like, I've never seen one of these pinholes not leak afterwards. They always leak.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, they'll
You
seal
just hope
eventually.
you hope yeah, you hope they just swell up or something and you're
Yeah.
good.
You
Yeah.
hope those spiles do their job like they're supposed to and seal back up and swell and get to put a good seal on there. But you know, hey, listen, sometimes they drip a bit. And you know, I think in Houston especially, like we can get these massive barometric pressure swings. And
Mhm.
that's really where I've always seen it, is like when you get like when you go from a lot of pressure to no pressure, or the other way around, is like you gotta imagine like this barrel, it's like kind of sealed. It is porous, but
Right.
like, you know, it's a little bit of its own little semi-pressure vessel. And then like you have these huge forces like pushing in and out. And then from the outside too, with the heat,
Yeah.
you have this
Pushing it.
whiskey which is expanding, and then it's like you have all these, like you have these countering balancing. It's like, you know, those barrels are going through a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you look at some really old barrels, and you know, we've had the privilege to work with some mezcal and tequila barrels, but like
Oh
you
wow.
look at some of those and you run your hand over the head, and there can be like a valley I could bury my fist in. Like the head is like that concave, where I'm just like, oh my God, like the things you've seen,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
because I think most of the time when we use these, I'm like, dude, they're one shot. Because A, like we tend to lose a lot of them because they tend to leak a little bit more. And B, I was like, man, like you gotta imagine, like, especially if you get like a mezcal, it's like, cool, that was probably, they buy a lot of Jack barrels. So it was like, it was
Yeah.
probably Jack. And then it went to a tequila distillery, and that tequila distillery then sold it down to a mezcal place. And I mean, a mezcal in barrels is kind of an unusual thing to
Right.
begin with. Mezcal
Right.
is usually white. So it's like, there's not that many of those. So it's like, well, it's at least 3 uses before I'm going to get it for a fourth use. I'm like, yeah, we're the last and final.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah. It's
there's
done
no
after this. It's done after
there's no
this.
done after this. So like, you
Yeah.
know, if you're talking about, you know, I came from the wine country in Sonoma, we'd always talk about, you know, quote unquote neutral oak,
Yeah.
right? This philosophy in winemaking that, you know, you can structurally the barrel's fine, but in terms of it, chemical composition or chemical contribution to the maturation of the barrel, it's like relatively exhausted, right?
Mhm.
I mean, and you can kind of do stuff like that with whiskey, you know, if you want to. But again, it's sort of like with the rules that we have, it's like you take a bourbon out of a proper new barrel and you put it in a quote unquote neutral oak. Well, you just stop the clock on that bourbon. It is now whatever age you dumped it
Yeah.
out at forever.
Yep.
I'm like, oh, you took it out at 4 years from that first barrel? That's a 4-year-old bourbon forever.
Yeah.
You know, unless you want to get 5 years into that resting process. Now you can say it was rested for 5 years, but you could never say it was aged for 4. This
Right.
is just the oddity that we have, right?
Yeah.
You know, whereas if we were in Scotland, that'd be a 9-year-old barrel of whiskey.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And okay, so that's a good caveat. And I know it's off topic of what we're going on, but this is a good conversation because do you I can guarantee that you do. How do you feel about the laws around bourbon, quote unquote? Like obviously with this barrel shortage, demand, whatever you want to call it. I know everybody's making whiskey now. Everybo's doing the thing.
Sure. So
Like
here's my thing.
should they be more lenient on using used oak and stuff like that? Like, how do you feel?
I think we can look at two historical examples. So one is the 125 proof entry point. So it used to be that you had to put bourbon in at or around 100 proof. That was the standard. They had like the government did a white page in like the early 1900s and basically determined, looking at our distilleries and also noting sort of the world tradition, to go in more like 140. That they thought you could maintain the character of bourbon so long as you didn't exceed 125 proof. And principally at the time, they were battling a shortage of quarter-sawn oak to make barrels from, because there was just not enough wood to go around. The same situation we find ourselves in today.
Right.
So there's an instance where basically the government came in and, essentially the TTP has a interesting role with bourbon, an interesting history. It's like they consider it this uniquely American thing, and it really is. Low entry proof relative to the world, new barrel requirement, very, very different from the rest of the world. And they kind of look at these as like key signifiers. And then you can look at what happened back in like the 60s, 70s, basically as white rum and vodka were taking over spirits, and a lot of bourbons were like legacy brands were dying. A lot of them tried to lighten their spirits to compete, to make them more palatable to consumers. There was an effort actually to basically take what is now the classification of light whiskey and expand bourbon to basically those requirements, where you could use a used barrel, you could distill it above 160, which is the upper limit right now for bourbon, and you could put it into the barrel quite high, up to like 140. I think it would be 160 entry, and then, but practically that would be about 140, looking at what's really done in the world. And the TTP sort of rejected that notion and created a separate class. So, and I think to the benefit of bourbon drinkers everywhere, because I think if they had diluted the requirements, we would not have this uniquely American spirit today.
Absolutely.
Because we would have moved more towards something that's like light whiskey, or, even you have like, in the classification, you have like whiskey distilled from bourbon mash, which is essentially, it's bourbon, we just put it in a used barrel. But the TTP, I think, is always going to point at those things like, hey, if you want to make something under those parameters, we have a classification for you. You just got to call it this. I mean, to be fair, like we have whiskey distilled from bourbon mash for blending purposes and premium American. And while it is bourbon-esque, I would say there are certain elements of it that are way more like Irish whiskey in terms of brightness, fruitiness, things like that, because it does not have that really distinct flavor of that virgin charred oak. And it's, so, I mean, here's my thing is like, could you expand the requirements a little bit to allow secondary aging in other vessels after primary aging? Maybe. I think that might be useful, just in the sense that you're like, listen, we would like to put more age on this, but we want to get it out of its first vessel, because we don't want to over oak it. Because you also see that like American bourbons, for the most part, do not have like the Titanic age statements of like some scotches. Like there's like 50-year-old scotches, 40-year-old you could never do that with bourbon.
No, there'd be nothing there.
A, our climate does not permit it, and B, it's just like it's just like there's the way our aging scheme works, there's just no way to do it. You would never consider doing it.
No.
So I mean, like, could you change it a bit? Could you relax it a bit? Maybe. Here's the thing is like, this is the second great barrel shortage that I've endured in my career. The first one was like wrapping up just as I entered the industry. And, the industry recovered from that. And, we came back to basically a time where barrels proliferated, many new cooperages opened up, and for a while barrels were quite cheap. And I think right now we're probably about 3 years away from essentially the production catching up with demand, perhaps. I don't know how many more distilleries are going to keep opening in Kentucky, because it seems, I think there's going to be portions of Kentucky that start to look a lot like the countryside in Scotland near Speyside, where it's like there's 60 distilleries in a 50-mile radius.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can sit in Rothless and Speyside against the River Spey, and literally from where you stand, you could, in 50 miles in any direction, you could hit 60 distilleries.
Yep.
We're getting there in Kentucky. I think, also look at other places like Texas has a tremendous amount of distilleries. Colorado has a tremendous amount of distilleries. New York has a tremendous amount of distilleries. California has a tremendous amount of distilleries. So it's not we're way less geographically confined.
Right.
I always tell people, I was like, there's 5 distinct whiskey regions in Scotland. You could fit about 6 or 7 Scotlands inside of the landmass of Texas.
Yeah.
So I'm like, is my whiskey different from stuff up in Dallas, Fort Worth, or
Yes.
Waco, or San Antonio, or the Hill Country? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Is stuff different? If I make whiskey at the northern tip of Scotland and I make it in the south of Ireland, or I make it, down in London, or I make it over in France or Switzerland or Germany as they're doing now, it's like,
Yeah.
don't you assume all those are going to be very different? Yeah, it's the same thing. Because you can slap Texas over most of those and you'd still fit them.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the cool things that we've talked about in the past is the different regions of Texas. And they have the Texas Whiskey Trail, and it's actually divided into different areas because obviously you can't do it all in one day. There's no way you're not going to do it. So it's like you literally could do the Dallas-Fort Worth area, maybe go up to Denison, maybe make that trip up to Iron Root, maybe. You could do that little area. Then you
might want to start there and move south.
Start there and move south, exactly. And then you could do the little hill country area, which is a lot. That might take you 2 days because there's a lot of distilleries. I mean, everywhere from where I'm at to, closer to where you're at. And then you have your region, and then you have, they're all over. So it's really cool to see, obviously, all these distilleries pop up with their different variations. Obviously, I'm a big Andalusia whiskey fan. And so, like, their little profile that they do 20 minutes away is totally different at Milam and Green, So it's like, it's so cool to see, but it's
and
also.
And I think it's like, there's like 4 elements that really make a distillery unique: people, ingredients, process, and location. Right? Yeah. And I mean, like, location is a big one, right? Just where you put the thing matters. You could run the other 3 things identical, because basically you can look at the whiskey tradition of Japan and the whiskey tradition of Scotland, and they basically have everything the same except location.
Yes.
And sure, the Japanese put a little bit of their spin on it, but basically the Japanese love Scotch so much, they just said, we'll just do this at home. And they literally imported all of the equipment, the ingredients, everything, and brought it to Japan and created essentially their own whiskey tradition in homage, basically, to Scotland and Scotch whiskey. But I think also, you talk about like, okay, like what about when they're really close, like that Andalusia, and then looking at Milam and Green? I mean, like, well, Milam and Green, you look at how that's led there and kind of some of the people involved in it. It's like, well, that's way more of like a Kentucky sort of ethos or practice. Where you look at something like Andalusia, it's like, well, that's totally different. They're producing very different products. And I think Andalusia kind of moving more towards that American single malt category. And I think you kind of see this, I don't want to call it a vibe, but maybe you see these 2 unique sort of offerings from Texas. One is bourbon, a very traditional product. And then you have sort of this more bleeding edge product, which is, American single malt, as that continues to develop here. And I think Texas honestly has some great examples on both sides.
Yes.
So I think we're pretty fortunate because you don't see that everywhere. But it's like culturally, it's just like, yeah, listen, the cultural practices at Andalusia versus Milam and Green are going to be monstrously different.
Yes.
And I'm like, those cultural practices inside of production makes so much difference in terms of the final product that distillery is going to create for consumers to enjoy.
Yeah. And another cool thing, with all of that difference is, and this is just speaking for most Texas distilleries. I don't know how it is in Kentucky. I know there's a lot more competition over there. 95% of the Texas distilleries are like, dude, you're doing cool shit. I want to, collab with you, or I want to do this. Like, so all of you guys are like just basically cheering each other on. And that's why we have this Texas Whiskey Festival and the Bastards Ball, so that everybody can kind of uplift everybody else and be like, I want to try what you have, your new stuff, because I want to try yours, and it's like everybody, you're not fighting over recipes. You're not fighting over that because it's so different everywhere you go. And everybody's so happy to be like, dude, you guys are doing cool shit. That's cool. I love that. So that to me, being a part of that is really cool, because obviously I love it, but at the same time, it's very uplifting to the community. And Texas boys are going to be, pro Texas, and that's just how it is. Not to say I don't love some good, Westward and stuff like that. I love all whiskey. I'll drink anything. You hand me a glass, I'll drink it. But I don't know. I don't really care for the Abasolo from Mexico. That's not great.
Oh
But
gosh.
we can get into that later.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. I mean,
Yeah.
that's I mean, to be honest, this whole thing with kind of this really friendly spirit of sort of this community of distillers in Texas is something quite unique, in my opinion. Coming from sort of the California, being over there for nearly a decade in that industry, um, it's way less friendly. It's way more competitive. I mean, to the point where I think, California is a little bit smaller than Texas and somehow has like 2 competing distillers guild for the state title.
Yeah.
So I'm like, that's how fractious it can become over there sometimes. In Texas, among whiskey distillers, it's incredible to me, the spirit of cooperation. To a certain degree, I think the stubbornness of Texas legislature really does aid us in a certain respect, because you have to be so determined and organized here to get anything passed.
Yes.
Because it's every 2 years, and you better be willing to sit down and mount like a 10-year campaign on some of this stuff. I'm like, gosh, if we were fighting each other, we'd never get an alignment on this stuff to get it done, because none of us are big enough to do it alone against these big package store lobbies and things. And I think, in California, it's a bit different. You don't have big package store lobbies like you do here. You don't have that kind of stuff. So I think to a certain degree, like the, how do we put this? Like the very, I hate to say it, like Texas for whiskey producers, I don't want to say it's unfriendly, but it's certainly not particularly helpful all the time.
No, it's not.
It's they love us, but it's we don't get any favors. So I think as a result, it's like well, who do you turn to in a situation like, oh, this guy over here is going through the same thing I'm going through. He knows what I'm feeling. Like, hey, we can be friends. It's like, oh yeah, let's definitely be friends. I mean, I think even just here in our little Houston community of distillers, like we all know each other, we all help each other out. Many of us are collaborating or working together in different ways. And, I think many of us were super happy to see the kind of the positive turn in the legislature this last session that basically allows some of the smaller producers to tap into some of the larger producers' base, essentially production base, and really help us propel our industry as a state. Because previously it's like everybody had to build up their own basic capacity, which I'm just like, that is the most insane capitalist proposition I have ever heard, where you're not allowed to go over to a guy and be like, I'd like to buy some of your capacity for a slight premium because it's cheaper than me developing it myself. Can I do that? Oh, no, I'm sorry. The folks over in Austin say that's a no-go. So I think a lot of us, there's great things coming, I think, from that, with some of the abilities that we've been given to operate with, that it gives us just a lot more base, a lot more capacity to work within. I'm super encouraged by that and the progress that, the Texas Whiskey Association and also the Texas Distilled Spirits Association, and all the work that's been done by those folks out there. I think, it's been an incredibly long struggle. I've been in it for like 5 years, and in 5 years, I'm like, how on earth do you guys get anything done out here? Because I can remember when Texans got to sell bottles before we could even sell a bottle out in California originally. And then like we had to wait like another 3 years to be able to sell a bottle. And I remember being so jealous, but it was like, oh no, it's like 2 bottles per 30 days. I was like, oh shoot, I take that over nothing. And then being out here now, it's like we just got up to 4. And I was like, and in California, it's like 2 bottles per person per day. And I was just like, guys, I mean, like most people don't show up to a distillery like a liquor store. I don't know why the liquor stores think that's the case. It's like farmer markets and grocery stores. You know what you don't do at a farmer's market? Shop for noodles.
Exactly.
Like you're still gonna go get rice and noodles over at the grocery store. You're still gonna get most of your liquor at the liquor store.
Well, and that's part of it. And we don't have to hash into this anymore. But it's like when you get into that 3-tier system and all of those things, which we've talked about in nauseum. But it turns into like, if I want to come to your distillery, I want to come to Yellow Rose, and let's say you have 5 offerings on the table for me to try that are your baseline offerings. And then you have, oh, here's a single barrel. Oh, here's a finished whiskey. Oh, here's this. Oh, here's a canned cocktail that we made. I can't get any of it. Like I can get my 4 bottles, which is great. I'm glad they raised it. But like at the same time, how many times are, I'm sure you get a lot of repeat customers in the area, but people traveling, you're going to get once a year, something like that,
Yeah.
as they come through. So it makes it really difficult for somebody like me, who is a whiskey enthusiast, collector, whatever you want to call it, to be like, hey, I want a couple of offerings. I don't want to just be like, here's my 2 bottles, let me go home. Like it turns into an issue. So of course, we all kind of skirt the line and put our wife's name and stuff down as well. So we make it work. We make it work.
But bring your second ID.
Exactly. So, military discounts or, whatever. But it's really cool to see that everybody in Texas, all the distillers, they're all backing each other to be like, hey, we need to get some legislation change. We need to get this to where we can get product to the customers. Not saying anything about the liquor store. Hey, liquor store can do their thing. They're getting some cool stuff. I went there today. They're getting some cool single barrels. They're getting all this cool stuff from Texas distilleries, which is awesome. I love it. But also, I want to be able to get that from you, because I would rather pay you than them. I hate to say it. One less dollar the tax man gets is that much better. But
I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
And we love it too. And a lot of times, we have like tasting room exclusives because of like, I want to reward the people that walk through my door. And I know that they may only walk through it once in a year, and they may only walk through it once in a lifetime. And I really want to have something special on the table for them to consider buying when they do that, or just to taste, that we're really proud of. Yeah, but it's tough with the restrictions that we have, obviously. And I think, I can tell you from looking at the data, it's like the vast, vast number of consumers that we get in a year are 1 or 2 time customers. It's like 95% of it.
Yeah.
Like that repeat business segment, and I'm like, and that's like volume based. That's not like individual based. That's the volume. Like the number of consumers I have that come more than twice in a year, who basically wait out their 30 days more than once. I'm like, it's the vanishing minority of people.
Yes, absolutely.
And I'm like, the reality is, I'm like, especially here in Texas, most people are just going to go to the liquor store. They're conditioned for it. It's like they can only get one thing from me. That's not terribly convenient for most people, because if people shop at the liquor store, like I shop at the liquor store, it's like, well, I got about 3 or 4 things I got in mind here, and I'm willing to be persuaded on 1 or 2 more. And I'm making an indulgent spend. Let's say it's not a horrible indulgence, but I'm indulging myself a little bit. And I'm like, I'd like to discover some things. There's a couple standards I want to have in the cabinet. And, hey, I'm looking for maybe I want to try some sort of new Irish. Or hey, I want to put another Highland Scotch in the cabinet, or that's reasonable, or whatever it is. Or hey, I need a gift. Or I'm like, listen, we're not a liquor store. We just sell the stuff we make. I think if we see more repeat business for anything, it's for people coming to us almost like a bar or hangout. Because like the neighborhood that the distillery in was like, it was very much like a light industrial manufacturing neighborhood when the distillery got started. And through the course of redevelopment in Houston, like we now have like townhouses going up all around us. So like, which is nice, because now we actually have like people in the neighborhood. So, like we have bingo, we have steak night, we have kind of all these sort of like standard fare things for people to come in and socialize and enjoy some product. And like, we have a bingo crew, which to me, I just kind of laugh about. I was like, we have a bingo crew? Like, oh yeah, and we have a steak night crew too. I was like, that's incredible. One of these nights, I'm going to come in and meet the bingo crew and say,
exactly.
Thank you guys for coming out, enjoying a cocktail, and playing bingo. I appreciate you.
Exactly. And this is a perfect caveat to kind of wrap it up. What one thing I wanted to have you talk about, if you still can, is kind of like your lineup of the whiskeys you have available, and the things that are in store, and some of the special things like you were saying that you have that are distillery exclusive. Because I know in the past, seeing y'all at festivals and stuff, you have some really cool little off-shelf things that you guys are doing, and it's really exciting. I was actually able to pick up at the last whiskey festival at a Specs or Total Wine, which they take them or leave them, a 10th anniversary bottle of y'all's, and he's got it. That's it. That's it. Yes. And I have yet to open it. It might be a this weekend type thing since we're talking,
Okay.
but it's really cool to see like special offerings getting out there in the shelves, because obviously I can't make the, I don't know, what is it, 5.5 hour trek down there all the time just to, just
Just
to
to grab a
sample
bottle.
just to sample the new thing. It's going to happen. I said that to everybody. I said that to Robert Licorice with Iron Root. I'm going up there too, so it's like I got to go both ways. But anyway, but so kind of tell us your offerings and what you guys have, obviously, besides the rye and some of the other things you have.
So the core lineup is basically the premium American blended whiskey, and I mean, it was designed to basically blind test against Crown in store demos.
Okay.
That was the whole thing. That was the design intent behind it. So it was designed to get a store-based swap from Crown to premium American. So sweet, very light, very drinkable. You have the rye, which you're drinking right now, which again, MGPI, Indiana source rye. Blend of 1 and 3-year-old, a little bit less intense on the spice, more approachable in that respect.
Really
And
good.
then you have our two bourbons. So one is this one, which is the Harris County, our newest offering, which is a
Okay.
high rye style. And wow, the
Okay.
filtering here, I'm going to have to work that out a little bit.
Yeah, no, I got it.
So 65, 25, 10 corn, rye, and malted barley. Again,
Okay.
all Texas grain, straight bourbon. Pretty much it's a real true high rye. Great flavor, sweet. Really, really, really interesting. A lot. Having a little trouble getting it everywhere in Texas so far. It's doing great basically in the 2 major metroplexes. So we got it very well distributed down here in Houston.
Okay.
We're getting a lot better distribution up in Dallas, Fort Worth. But in terms of getting it out west to Austin and San Antonio and everywhere out there, or even getting it more south, like we're having a little bit of trouble there just getting the distributors to bring enough stock and product into those areas. We're working on it, kind of a thing.
Right.
But that's our newest offering, and then kind of the classic standard for us in the main portfolio is the Outlaw bourbon. That 100% Texas Yellow Dent corn. Again, still has that 1-year age statement on the back of the bottle, but basically all the liquid that's been going in now for over a year has been straight.
Okay.
We just haven't made that adjustment basically with the new filing with the TTB and the new labels. We have a full new label set that's been developed. We're just working through the marketing end of things right now on package development and some other things before we roll that change out. And then, like you mentioned, the 10-year anniversary, that was a really fun project that involved taking Outlaw bourbon, putting it into brand new barrels that were also had specific different toast levels on them. So it was basically 10 different barrels that got refilled. And then those 10 barrels made the batch that became the 10-year anniversary. So we just hit that number 10 as many times as we could, basically. And then more recently, what we have coming up here is we actually have a mezcal finished Outlaw bourbon that will be straight. That's going to come here to Texas, also be available at the distillery. And then for a distillery exclusive this year, we're going to do a cognac finished Outlaw that we've done a couple of different iterations as private barrel selections or single barrel selections here, there, and everywhere. But we've kept one for ourselves that we're going to bring out this year in the tasting room as a tasting room exclusive.
Sweet. I mean, that is so cool that y'all are doing that, because everybody has their basic offerings, and the basic offerings are great. Don't get me wrong. The Harris County is, to me, like, it's the quintessential bourbon, but it's not. It's a quintessential Texas bourbon. It has a lot more spice to me. It has a lot more spice, but it's not like super spicy like a blow your head off with the spice.
Yeah, we truly try to avoid that spice bomb character.
Right.
Of course we find those barrels when we go through the lots. Like I just went through like 100 barrels of Harris, and there were definitely some that like the notation was spice bomb.
Right.
So it's like when we build up the batches for those, like, okay, like let's spread these out.
Yeah.
We got to dilute the spice
dilute
out
that a little bit.
I'm like, my other note, like, looks like we're a little bit weak on the note side for spice here. So let's chuck a spice bomb in there and see what happens. And it's, I've almost gotten so acquainted now with drinking Texas bourbon, I kind of forget that like we've sort of formed this unique subcategory for Texas bourbon. If people always ask me, well, how do you define Texas bourbon? I said, it's a one-word qualifier. The word is bold. Much like Texas itself, much like the people of Texas, it's a no holds barred sort of a thing. I'm like, we just go for it. and it's unabashed, it's unapologetic, and if you don't like it, it's not for you. All right, we'll move right along. You'll find something you like over there, and we
Oh,
kind of don't care if you don't like it.
yep,
Which to me, I'm like, it's a lot of fun to make a product like that.
yep,
It's just like, hey, we're gonna do our thing, and we're gonna be real proud of it. And I think, like you said, Texans love Texas products.
yes,
Um, we're very fortunate in that respect. I would say like the state level pride here in Texas is the strongest I felt anywhere.
yeah,
And coming from a place where I thought like, California prides itself on all California grown or California whatever, but I was like, oh, you got nothing on Texas.
yeah, yeah.
Realistically speaking.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's one of the other cool things is you guys are leaning into that and you're taking that and running with it. And I can't wait to see, the cool stuff there. Have you thought, and I'm gonna throw this out there, being a single malt guy, have y'all thought about a single malt?
So we've done one historically in the past,
Okay.
and I know we kind of talked at the head of this thing
Yeah.
about sometimes that things don't work out so well, and they're kind of these, how do we put these like operational,
Right.
financial, market, um, I don't want to call them failures, but let's call them lessons. We had a single malt that was a big lesson, and it
Okay.
kind of predates my time here at the company, and I sort of
Right.
inherited a bunch of the liquid, and I'll be honest, like the numbers on it are real bad, in terms of the financials. Now,
Right.
that being said, I'm like, have we thought about doing something or bringing something out? I've certainly considered it, and I think kind of with the way the law can work now, where we could go in somewhere that's a little bit better set up to run and make it,
Right.
and sort of like do a liquid to design and spec. Then yeah, I mean, I think we could do something like that, and then we can kind of take it from there. Like, okay, we're going to take the white, we're going to put it in a barrel, we're going to own the entire life cycle of this thing, except for that first little bit of production,
Right.
and we may look at doing something like that.
Okay.
I think for us, there's a couple projects there I'd like to do. American Single Malt is one of them, as is a weeded.
Oh yeah.
Because
Yeah.
that's kind of the thing that, I'm like, cool, we have 100% corn, which is like, that's way deep in the craft niche.
Mhm.
And you have a high rye, and it's real high. So it's like, that's kind of in your more traditional niche. But the thing we're sort of missing, and I feel almost like is a missed opportunity, especially in Texas where we grow so much wheat,
Mhm.
would be a true Texas wheated bourbon, which,
Yes.
and then certain, well-known distilleries that start with a G, are pretty famous for that. But
Yes.
and I
Yes.
love Dan, so
Yeah.
and we get along real well. But it was like, hey Dan, I might just have to rip off your idea there because
Yeah.
everybody loves a wheated bourbon.
They
Um,
do.
but so I think that's kind of the two big things to my mind. I'd really like to see us play with, along with maybe some more experimental corn variations on some of
Mhm.
our mash bills. Like let's bring in a Johnny Red, or some
Yeah.
other these more heritage varieties for
Mhm.
substitution on the mash bill, and kind of
Yeah.
see what we get as the point of differentiation. But for me, those are kind of the larger projects, and then we just love playing with finishes because
Yeah.
I hate to say it, it's like throwing a filter on your camera. It's like you can suddenly do a lot more with what you got.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of fun to do that. So that's kind of the angles we're working on right now.
That is awesome. Because and it also leaves you a lot to play with, because doing the finishes like we've talked about and doing you have a core mash bill of different things, and even just putting like a 5% Johnny Red in, it's going to change the mash bill completely. It's going to change the whole flavor. So like just working on that, and I mean, I can't wait to see. I mean, y'all are knee deep in it. Y'all been in the game for a minute, in Texas, and I feel like y'all are just now getting your stride, which is really cool, and I'm really excited about that. And yeah, that I mean, it's going to be an amazing ride in the near future. What you guys are putting out, and with your age statements, have you thought about like a bald and bond or anything like that as
Yeah, I mean,
well?
I think it's definitely in the cards now working with 4-year-old liquid. I
Mhm.
mean, I'd really like to reserve the bottled and bond for when we get into our full format barrels, because that
Right.
4-year-old liquid that we're pulling right now is out of 30s.
Oh,
So
okay.
we could certainly make a bottled and bond out of 30s. There's a part of me that like I almost want to save that bottled and bond for those kind of encounters we have with some barrels that we kind of set aside to save.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, it's certainly kind of been on my radar, and I've been looking from like like there's been a couple opportunities here, like out of every, let's say, 100-barrel lot that we look at, there's usually like about 8 to 10 barrels that are kind of like a cut above the rest, or
Right.
truly unique.
Right.
And like, I'm kind of like segregating those out and trying to save the liquid. As I told my crew, I was like, hey, listen, if we're making a cake, that's the sprinkles.
Right.
I'm like,
That's
this is
sprinkles.
like, these are the toppers. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know how else to describe these to you.
Right.
Like, they're so unique and different. Like, if I bury these in a batch, we're just gonna kind of waste them.
Right.
It's like, you put sprinkles on a cupcake, you don't put sprinkles on a wedding cake, right?
Right.
So I
Right.
was like, when we're building a big batch, we're building a wedding cake. But when
Right.
we get to something smaller, I want to save this liquid for that. So we'll see. It's certainly in the works potentially.
Mhm.
I feel like bottled and bond, because you only have 2 seasons to do it in a year.
Right.
You're a little bit restricted in that
Right.
sense. Everything's got to come out of the same season from the same year. Um, it's we're going to kind of see what the liquid gives us and something like
Mhm.
that, because I feel like bottled and bond should really be one of those, like, it's going to kind of present itself. You can go
Yes.
looking for it. We don't
Right.
really have enough inventory to do that like Dickel does, or somebody like
Right.
that, who's kind of,
Right.
to my mind, Dickel kind of made bottled and bond famous recently,
They did.
and made it popular. And I
Mhm.
think Nicole did a great job out there with all of that in the last
Yeah.
couple of years. I think I've drunk through every edition she's made since she's been over at Dickel. And I'm like, I'm positive there's one sitting here in my cabinet right now waiting for me to enjoy,
I'm
because
sure.
I basically, if I see it on the shelf, I grab it.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, we'll kind of wait for the liquid on something
Right.
like that.
Right.
Either bottled in bond. Another idea would basically be to rehash to some extent this 10-year anniversary project that we did, in terms of a secondary new barrel toasted finish, to do
Right.
like a double barrel,
Okay.
um, or even like a double barrel bottled in bond potentially, or
Right.
something like that, to kind of.
That sounds cool.
So like, we floated some ideas. Nobody go steal that. That's mine.
Right. No,
Um,
no, it's all yours. It's all yours. All
but
right.
yeah, I mean, eh, and there's so much fun stuff to try. It's almost
Yeah.
like, the reality is to bring something out to market to really get it to a lot
Yeah.
of people. Like the 10 years, like, we put a little bit of it out to market, but we ended up kind of being a tasting room thing.
Right.
Because, again, with only 10 barrels, with only being like a 500 something gallon batch, with only having
Right.
400 something cases to push out, I'm like, you can hardly scratch Texas with 400 cases.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's sort of like, for me, I'm like, where we're at today, I was like, I'd love to do these, but I'd really like to get them to scale, where it's
Yep.
like, we could take this, hey, if I'm going to take it to Texas, I want to take it everywhere.
Right.
I want it in Austin. I want it in San Antonio. I want it down in, I want it way down south. I want it on the Rio Grande. I want it up in El Paso. I want it in Dallas-Fort Worth, and I want it in Houston. And it's like, but to do that, you need a lot of volume.
Yeah.
You're talking about thousands of cases at that point, just to cover a state for
Yeah.
one product. So those are big batches.
Mhm.
That's, for us, that's 1,000 cases. You're making 1,200, 1,300 gallons of liquid. That's a lot
That's a
of
lot.
barrels.
That's a lot.
It's like
That's a lot.
150 barrels easy for us on 30s,
Yeah.
maybe 160. Maybe that gets down to about half of that on 53s. But for
Right.
us, that's a lot of barrels.
Absolutely.
One distillation run for us fills about five to 6 barrels. So if
Okay.
you can imagine how many distillation runs something like that starts to represent in terms of
Yeah.
the calendar of our year,
Yeah,
it's like, well,
absolutely.
that's a lot.
That's a lot. That's a lot. All right, man. That's crazy. I'm so excited for you guys, and also to all the listeners. Thank y'all for listening. But at the same time, go to Yellow Rose. If you're around the Houston area, go check them out. Obviously they're doing a bingo. Go play some bingo. Let's do that. Let's do
Go
steak
get
night.
some steak. Yeah.
Absolutely. And one more time, go ahead and promote your socials, and then we'll get off. Stick on. I want to talk to you for a second, and then we'll go from
Yeah,
there.
sure. So check us out at yellowrosedistilling.com. You can come in, book a tour, see our schedule of events on Instagram at Yellow Rose Distilling Houston. And then for me, at Distiller Langen on Instagram.
All right. So guys, get out there. Whiskey's happening all around us, and you need to be part of it, because it's going to leave you in the dust if you don't. But until next time, keep your spirits up. Peace.